Before we begin this episode, let me just say that this was originally done back in 2023 or so. At that time, the historic house to be discussed here was still standing. Jumping ahead just 2 or so years later, and it had met a tragic end. It was demolished, leaving behind a more enamored push for the preservation of historic homes. Let this episode now reflect on a past that has now been erased. Here we are at the intersection of Ridge Road and Cranberry South River Road. Here, Ridge Road turns into Road Hall Road, and once it does, this is the house that sits eloquently on the southeastern corner. This, folks, is the Holmes Tallman house, and it will be the focus of this episode of Let's Explore This. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. That National Register document, it is going to be from where the information for this episode will be culled. Since the house is privately owned, the majority of this episode is going to revolve around photos. And a few of those photos, they will come from this document. Most exterior photos will be taken by me, with the exceptions being what photos I can find of the exterior that I cannot readily get access to. The rear features and possible outbuildings could possibly fall into that category. Actually, though, the house does not appear to be occupied at the time this episode was being compiled. Therefore, I am not too worried about hanging out here a bit to capture exterior footage. However, a couple of things do appear to have been altered, but more on that a bit later. Still, though, interior photos, of which I have many, come from this site, which had the house up for sale way back in 2011. Today, in 2023, it appears to be off-market, at least according to this site. Okay, so what the Holmes Tallman house is an outstanding example of the large, square carpenter's Italianate farmhouse, elaborated with a full attic and a cupola. It is unique in Middlesex County and one of the finest of its type in all of New Jersey. It is all the more significant for its remarkable state of preservation. Not only are the exterior and setting intact, but so is all of the interior architectural decor. That includes the lighting fixtures, the carpets, and some furnishings purchased for the house by Jacob Tallman over a century ago. Keep in mind, though, that information for this episode does date from the late 1970s. I am using a mix of old and new photos. Things could very well have changed in over 3 decades. Regardless, such houses like this were ultimately derived from the wedding of Italianate villa and palazzo forms, with a plan type utilized since the 18th century. They translated into wood designs featured for masonry construction and pre-Civil War pattern books. The closest parallel to the Holmes Tallman house is this Villa Number 3 in Riddell's Architectural Designs book of 1861. Yes, the Holmes Tallman house, it is a large carpenter's Italianate farmhouse that can also double as a villa. It is built of wood and rests on a brick foundation. Originally, it consisted of a 3-story cubicle main section with a 2-story wing to the rear. A 1-story addition, consistent in style with the original construction, was made to the wing at the end of the 19th century. There are 5 bays on the front of the main section and 4 bays on the sides. A 1-story porch does surround the front and both sides. Its roof, with its bracketed eaves, is carried on tapered paneled piers, all square in section, which rest on high square paneled bases. The piers, they have a necking of eyelet jigsaw work. Matching pilasters further mark the building's corners. Entrance into the house is through a doorway with a corseted architrave and a segmental transom. And there is a double-leaf paneled door. All other openings on the first floor are French windows that hold projecting lintels, all decorated with eyelet work similar to that found on the piers. Similar lintels, furthermore, do surmount the 2/2 sash windows on the second floor. And as for the attic story, its fenestration consists of paired and arched single-pane windows. Hey, look, I think a window is missing. But all the openings, with the exception of this here door, are hung with movable louvered shutters. The house, it is covered with a shallow hip roof crowned by a square cupola pierced by double-arched windows, and the brick chimneys, they do rise on each side. Wide overhanging eaves on both the roof and the cupola do rest like those of the veranda on open brackets with acorn drops. Trim on the wing repeats that of the main section, but at a smaller scale. And there is a conservatory, a small conservatory, positioned on the southwest side of the wing. In plan, the first floor of the main section, it features a conventional central stair hall. To the left of that are a pair of square rooms separated by sliding doors, each with a fireplace. To the right of that is a double parlor, also with 2 fireplaces, but open through its entire length, although marked at the center by a segmental arch resting on floriated consoles. Now, keep in mind that the photos being shown may not always correspond with what is being discussed, but room to the left. As an example, I have no way of knowing if this is to the left. I can see sliding doors either once or even still being in the center there. Anyhow, back to the description. There are 4 rooms and a bathroom on the second floor and 6 in the attic. The 2-story wing, it has 2 rooms on the first floor. One, according to an owner, is the original dining room. The other is the kitchen, with a back stair running along the wall that divides the wing from the main section. And again, keep in mind, I can't be sure if the pics shown always align with what is being discussed. The 1-story wing was added by the present owner's grandfather, that is, by the late 1970s owner's grandfather, as this information has been culled from this 1979 document, as mentioned much earlier. Well, this 1-story wing, it consists of a single room, the kitchen, the present kitchen, with an adjacent pantry. This is a more recent kitchen photo. Could it then be in here and not in here? Also, there does exist a cellar, of which I have no interior photos of, under the entire house except for under the one-story wing. It is said to have still contained, in the 1970s, that is, the hot air furnace installed way back circa 1870. Not sure about today, but it is said to consist of a square brick chamber containing a cast iron firebox. Sorry, no photo, but the door to its stoke hole, it is said to have been inscribed with James Patent, New York. Now, folks, two things on site have been altered. So much so that for those I will need to resort to photos. I have no choice. Why, might you ask? Well, because an on-site outbuilding and an on-site structure are both now gone. However, don't fret, photos I do have, and those will have to do. There is a historic carriage house on the property, as well as this, described as a large urn, both of which hold photos included in, but not discussed in, the document. As with other features of this property, unless I can get a vantage point without stepping onto the grounds, these photos will have to do. However, if you see any in the footage, then I did manage to capture a vantage point. But yeah, no vantage point can possibly exist. That carriage house and that urn are gone. And at the time this episode was being compiled, there was some kind of work going on, like some kind of excavation work, not sure. Could those dirt piles there be the site of an archaeological excavation? I mean, such an excavation does sometimes occur over time in the presence of historic sites, so not sure. But let's get back to the history of the site. You see, a building appears at approximately the location of the Holmes Tallman house on the 1850 map of Middlesex County, belonging to an Aaron Gulick. However, according to family tradition, the house, it was built by Francis Holmes circa 1860 and purchased by the present owner's great-great-grandfather, Jacob B. Tallman, in 1870. Stylistically, the 1860 date is certainly more likely, and overall, it might be assumed that this here, the present house, replaced an earlier building on the same site. Yes, I was not able to locate any historic photos of the Gulick, Holmes, or Tallman family. Maybe some do exist, though I do not go out of my way to locate photos of people. I do a quick search, and if I find some, I include them, and if not, it is what it is. But tradition, it is confirmed by title transfers. Francis Holmes purchased 2 parcels of property from the estate of Aaron Gulick, executor, in 1858 and 1860. In 1869, these were sold by Holmes to James Gulick, who resold them the following year to Jacob B. Tallman. The house has remained in the hands of his descendants up until at least the 1970s. I would show the deeds, but apparently online deeds for Middlesex County start at 1929. Although no specific threat to the Holmes-Tallman house appears to be imminent, it was, in the late 1970s, located at the junction of roads serving two of the fastest growing municipalities in Middlesex County, South Brunswick and Monroe. Pressure to ease traffic congestion in the southern portion of the county was at the time growing, and so proposals to widen the roads or redesign the intersection were expected to surface in the near future. Well, that was in the 1970s, and it is now 2023, and it certainly appears the house is still here. Roadwork or not, it didn't go anywhere. Despite this house not being occupied as of the present, or so it seems to appear, the grounds are still being maintained by someone. The grass is well manicured. And with that said, this house, it was grabbed and it was documented. Now we need to see what other surprises we can find here in Middlesex County and beyond. See you on the next episode.